This is Inside the Americas. Here's a look at what's coming up in today's show. Colombians vote against the peace deal with FARC rebels in a vote that was supposed to be a shoo-in. More on just why the no's won on the way. Crucial, controversial, and long-delayed elections in Haiti are still set to take place this weekend, despite the devastation of Hurricane Matthew. And most evangelical Christians in the U.S. say they will vote for Donald Trump, but most of them say they're only doing it to avoid Hillary Clinton. I'm Jeannie Godula. Well, this week was marked by a shock referendum in Colombia. After 52 years of war with FARC rebels and 4 years of talks, what should have been a straightforward referendum to approve a peace deal was voted down. Mark Thompson explains why.
The government called it Colombia's best chance of achieving peace, an opportunity the voting public turned down. A low turnout helped the no votes reach over 50%, despite opinion polls predicting it would pass comfortably. Those against the agreement with FARC rebels say the Marxist group shouldn't be allowed to establish itself as a legitimate political party.
We've all been victims of the FARC, and the no-vote victory is a call for the government to renegotiate the agreements, not to hand over the country to the FARC.
Under the deal, the guerrilla group would hand over its weapons to UN monitors and in exchange turn into a political party with 10 congressional seats guaranteed through 2026. And FARC members who confess to their crimes committed during the conflict will avoid serving time in prison. Former Colombian President Alvaro Uribe, who led the No campaign, says the public aren't against the peace deal. Instead, he argues the current agreement is too lenient. He wants all of the FARC's drug money to be handed over to authorities and harsher punishments for crimes committed during the 52-year conflict. The government is attempting to get the peace deal back on track. A team of senior officials has been appointed to hold talks with opposition parties. But negotiators warned prior to the referendum that they didn't believe the country could get a better deal. Analysts say the government could still push through the agreement despite the referendum's result.
The agreement is still legally viable. It didn't need to go through this consultation phase. It was the president who wanted to put it to a referendum so that he could get the popular vote. But the agreement still stands.
But the clock is ticking. The government is under pressure to find a new deal which would get voters back on side, appease opposition politicians, and keep FARC rebels at the negotiating table. The current ceasefire comes to a close at the end of the month. Until then, guerrilla fighters are expected to return to their own so-called safe zones to avoid provocations.
This week, Hurricane Matthew battered the Caribbean. The worst storm there in a decade is swirling on toward the Bahamas and the southeastern coast of Florida. At least 9 people have been killed and hundreds of thousands forced to flee. The worst damage has been in the poorest country in the Americas, Haiti. The UN has called Hurricane Matthew the worst humanitarian crisis to hit Haiti since the earthquake 6 years ago. And the country is still suffering from a political crisis as well. But crucial, controversial, and long-delayed elections there are still set to go ahead this weekend. The presidential election is actually a redo after last year's vote prompted rioting across the nation. But now a feeling of apathy has set in, particularly in a massive shantytown known as Canaan. Despite continued promises, there are no schools there, no electricity, and no roads. Manon Hertel and Pauline Louvet report.
A song and some dance to wake up an entire city. These activists from PHTK party are trying to rekindle the electoral flame with the inhabitants of Canaan.
We must mobilize all together. Everyone can finally eat their fill here.
But for Canaan, this sounds like another unfulfilled promise. What was supposed to be a makeshift shelter after the earthquake of 2010 has become a slum spread over 116 acres. 900,000 residents forgotten by all.
During this campaign period, politicians care about us for our votes. But once they're elected, they don't change the situation of Canaan.
ne touche pas la situation des gens de Canaan.
They promised to connect us with drinking water, but so far nothing has been done.
Jean-Robert has lived in this provisional shelter for 6 years now. His 5 children have never been to school. He claims he has never received any help from state authorities.
This is where we sleep, but the problem is the roof is not waterproof. When it rains, the water flows over us.
A few homes have access to electricity through solar panels, but even those are only in exchange for product placements of well-known drinks.
I was offered a refrigerator that works on solar energy.
But even for the few who might want to vote, the choice has been made difficult. There will be no polling stations in Canaan this time.
In 2010, we, the inhabitants of Canaan, we had flocked to the polls, but we didn't see any results.
We stayed at the same point. We do not even have enough to feed our children. For me, it's decided I will not vote.
Every night for 6 years, Canaan plunges into darkness and insecurity. For the parliamentary elections in 2015, voter turnout was as low as 18%. This year, it is expected to decline much further.
It's time now for our weekly look at the race to the White House. Well, it was a busy week on the campaign trail. On Tuesday, the 2 vice presidential candidates went head-to-head in their first and only debate. Republican Mike Pence did his best to remain calm and steady despite frequent attacks from the usually low-key Democrat Tim Kaine. But the back and forth got heated as both candidates interrupted and insulted each other and their running mates. In the meantime, Hillary Clinton seems to be riding the wave of her good debate performance against Donald Trump. The former Secretary of State is now polling 3 points ahead of her rival. She's also ahead in the key states of Florida and Pennsylvania. And Donald Trump's tax issues continue to haunt him. A New York Times report says Trump likely paid no income tax for almost 2 decades. The celebrity real estate developer, who's the first presidential candidate in decades to refuse to release his full tax returns, has not denied the report. He says he just brilliantly made the most of U.S. tax rules. Well, one key voting bloc in the U.S. are evangelical Christians. There are about 60 million of them across America. And while the vast majority say they will vote Republican come November, most say it's a vote more against Hillary Clinton than for Donald Trump.
These churchgoers in Spartanburg, South Carolina, are part of one of the largest voting blocs in the U.S. election. During the primaries, many evangelical voters backed other Republican candidates, but the latest polls show that more than 90% of them now support Donald Trump.
I don't think that my standard candidate is on the ballot, but I'm going to vote to the right. Jesus sat on the right hand of God. We threw the nets on the right side. I'm going to vote to the right side.
I wouldn't call either one of the candidates conservative, but I think of the two, there's an obvious choice.
But there's little enthusiasm for the Republican candidate in this evangelical stronghold. And the Trump camp is worried that, like in the 2012 election, many may choose to stay home on polling day. But Pastor Hamlet says it's their Christian duty to vote.
I believe, according to Romans chapter 13, a Christian has a responsibility to be involved. You respect the government. We may not always agree, but we respect, and we're a part of that. And Christians should be a part of the process.
Almost all of the Republican primary candidates have visited this pro-life pregnancy center during their campaigns, knowing that abortion is one of the top issues for evangelicals and one they feel disqualifies Clinton straight off the bat.
If we go the other way and support Mrs. Clinton, we know what we've got. We know that it's going to be abortion on demand. We know that it's going to be marriage between anybody. We know, there's just some things we know about her. We don't have that with Donald Trump. We don't have a voting record.
The local Christian university is hosting forums around the topic of evangelicals and the election. Bucking the trend, some students and professors threw up objections to a possible President Trump.
At the moment, I would not vote for him because he does not pass that most important test of love your neighbor as yourself.
Nationwide, white evangelicals account for almost 20% of the population and 39% of the Republican Party. Here in South Carolina, they're an even stronger voting force. Due in part to their voting record, the state has stayed Republican since 1976 and is unlikely to turn blue. But in key battleground states like Ohio, Pennsylvania and Florida, the evangelical vote could play a deciding role.
And we'll wrap up now with the brazen holdup of U.S. reality star Kim Kardashian here in Paris. Robbers dressed as policemen broke into the private luxury residence where she was staying, held a gun to her head, and took off with more than $10 million worth of jewels. They then reportedly raced away on bicycles, but not before leaving her tied up in a bathroom. Kardashian's husband, singer Kanye West, cut short a concert on hearing the news. And while there's been much celebrity support for Kardashian, who was here for Fashion Week, style icon Karl Lagerfeld was not as kind. He slammed Kardashian for being too flashy with her money. Well, that's all the time we have for this Inside the Americas. We'll see you again next week for all the news from north to south.